There comes a moment in every human life, an inevitable point that no one escapes, when the ground beneath your soul trembles in a way no external storm could ever cause. It is not the collapse of a building, nor the loss of a single event, but an earthquake of the inner world, sudden, shattering, and irrevocable. One day you wake and discover that everything you once leaned upon has shifted out of reach. Family that once felt like a fortress now seems far away. Friends you trusted without question become silent shadows. Possessions and titles that once bolstered your worth no longer steady your steps. The relationships you once cherished may fall quiet without explanation. The promises that once glimmered like lanterns in the darkness may quietly fade until they are indistinguishable from the night itself. Smiles vanish. Familiar voices withdraw. You are left standing in the stark, unadorned truth that every human heart dreads. I have no one left. And yet it is precisely here, at the coldest edge of human loneliness, that something hidden and holy begins to move. For when all else is stripped away, when no human arm remains to hold you, when the applause has faded and the crowds have gone home, you are finally able to see with startling clarity the one presence that has never departed. The presence that has never wavered. The presence that cannot be shaken by time, betrayal, or death itself. God. This is not merely a season of isolation. This is sacred ground. This is the holy undoing of every chain that once bound your identity to the approval of others. The gentle loosening of your grip on earthly securities so your hands can open to eternity. Here you no longer live to please, to perform, or to prove. Here your soul, step by slow step, returns, not to the counterfeit comfort of human assurance, not to the safety of bank accounts or fleeting pleasures, but to the living presence of the Almighty. You are not the first to walk this lonely road, and you will not be the last. The great lives that marked human history with divine light, Abraham, Joseph, Elijah, each passed through this same valley of shadows. Abraham left behind all that was familiar, journeying toward a voice he had never seen. Joseph, sold and betrayed, endured years in prison, forgotten by those who once promised loyalty. Elijah stood solitary against a tide of false prophets, hunted by kings, sustained only by the truth that burned in his heart. Each one's steps were branded with the fire of solitude, yet none were truly alone. Neither are you. You are not abandoned, you are being refined. You are not discarded, you are being prepared. A holy work is unfolding deep within, in places unseen by others yet strong enough to reconfigure the very architecture of your soul. So do not turn bitter in the silence. Do not flee from the stillness now wrapping itself around you like an unfamiliar cloak. Stay, stand firm, because it is here, when the world turns away, when friends fall away, when even those you love most no longer understand your language, that something sacred is born. It is here, at the furthest edge of yourself, when your voice cracks and you whisper through clenched breath, God, I can't take one more step, that heaven itself begins to move, and the strength that rises within you will not be your own. The storm may rage on, the waves may remain high, yet you will see the one who walks upon the water. Faith is not forged in comfort. It is birthed in paradox, when every outward sign screams that you are alone, but you choose to believe you are being carried. When every circumstance says it is over, yet you hear the quiet, unyielding whisper in your spirit, I am not finished with you. That is faith that has walked through the fire. That is belief unshaken by loss. In moments like these, you learn something that textbooks cannot teach and sermons cannot fully explain. That God does not require favorable conditions to make himself known. He does not wait for a crowd to be gathered or for the timing to align by human calendars. He does not stand at a distance until the crisis is over. He walks into the lion's den, into the prison cell, into the furnace while the flames still roar. He did it then. He does it now. Perhaps today you feel overlooked, invisible to the world. People admire the strength they see on the outside, but are blind to the storms you endure within. They see the smile but cannot guess at the sleepless nights, the silent tears, the prayers that dissolve into sighs. And without realizing it, you may have begun to believe the lie that you must carry it all alone. But you were never meant to walk alone. There is one closer than a brother, one whose presence is unchanging across all the seasons of time, who sees every hidden wound and says to you even now, "You are mine, you are not forgotten, you are not alone." And when the day comes that you rise from what you thought was your ending, you will carry something that cannot be stripped from you, a living testimony, forged in fire, tempered in tears, and strengthened in faith. You will speak peace into chaos because you have walked through chaos and found peace there. You will plant hope in hearts that have been hollowed by grief because you once felt the soil of your own hope go dry, and you know the one who can make it bloom again. And when someone asks, "How did you survive?" your lips will curve into a knowing smile as you answer, "I had no one left but God, and that was enough." There is a kind of loneliness that is not the result of failed relationships or punishment from heaven, but a sacred separation. It is a silence so deep it becomes an invitation, if you dare not run, to return not to a geographical place, but to the very source of your being. This kind of loneliness does not come to cage you. It comes to cleanse you. It does not arrive to end you. It arrives to begin something truer, deeper, and more enduring than anything you have known before. In these moments, when every familiar voice fades and the old rhythms dissolve, an awakening begins. Slow, quiet, almost imperceptible. You may mourn the laughter you no longer hear, the conversations that no longer reach you, but without warning, you begin to sense the gain within the loss, the absolute unwavering presence of the one who never leaves. Throughout the long story of humanity, those God has used most powerfully were led, often unwillingly, into places of deep desolation. Abraham walking without sight of the destination, guided only by an invisible voice. Joseph, buried in obscurity, years stretching long in a cell while his dream lay silent. Elijah, isolated in a land of idols, speaking truth to a hostile throne. All severed from their old lives, all without human applause, all misunderstood. And yet, in that severing, they were not destroyed. They were set apart, remade by a hand they could not see but could always trust. Perhaps you too are walking in that unmarked land. You may not call it a wilderness, but you feel its contours, the gatherings that feel hollow, the conversations that no longer connect, the quiet withdrawal from those who cannot see the war within you. To the world, it may look like weakness, but to heaven, it may be the beginning of your return. Loneliness in the world's eyes is something to be feared, avoided, cured at all costs. But in the light of faith, it can become an altar, a hidden sanctuary where the masks finally fall away. Here, with no one watching, you pour out what you have never dared to say. No more rehearsed lines, no more polished answers, no fear of being misunderstood. This is the place where you can tremble without shame, where your honesty becomes worship. Here you can confess, "I'm tired, I'm afraid. I have nothing left to give." You know that God is not repulsed by your weakness. He does not demand you stand tall. He comes in the very moment you collapse and whispers, "I am here." And in that sacred stillness, you begin to hear his voice more clearly. Not because he was ever silent, but because now, at last, the world has gone quiet enough for you to listen. You discover you do not need the constant approval of others to feel whole. You do not need to win the race or please the crowd. You need only to be present in the gaze of the one who knows every fracture in your heart and still calls you beloved. There is a loneliness that devours, yes, but there is also a loneliness that resurrects. And in the silence, you decide which one it will be. You can run from it, see it as punishment, or you can receive it as a divine summons to return to the love that never depended on your performance, your applause, or your success. Pure love, unchanging love. One day looking back, you will no longer call these days hell. You will call them your meeting place, the ground where you stopped pretending, stopped performing, stopped running. The place where the Almighty sat down beside you, not to lecture, not to question, but to simply be present. And from that place, you will begin again, not by mustering strength, but by receiving life. A life that flows from the one you feared had abandoned you, only to discover he had been beside you all along. There are moments in life when all the heart longs for is a word, any word, a flicker of confirmation that we are still seen, still known, still loved. We wait for the phone call, the message, the open door, the gentle sign from heaven that will assure us our prayers have not vanished into some unfeeling void. Yet often all that comes is silence. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months, and the absence of response begins to take on a weight of its own, pressing on the chest, whispering questions we never thought we'd ask. Has God turned away? Has he decided my cries are not worth answering? Was his presence only something I imagined in my need? The danger of silence is not merely that it leaves us without answers, but that it leaves space for fear to speak with authority. And fear, if left unchecked, will tell you that you are alone, that your prayers have been wasted, that you have been left to stumble in the dark without a guide. Yet what we often miss in the throes of that aching quiet is that silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is the language of God. In a world addicted to noise, where every moment is filled with alerts, conversations, and the relentless hum of human activity, we have been conditioned to believe that where there is no sound, nothing is happening. But the ways of God are not the ways of the world. He does not shout to prove his presence. He does not rely on earthquakes and fire to demonstrate his power. In the story of Elijah, the prophet stands in the mouth of a cave, desperate for a sign of God's nearness. A wind tears through the mountains, so fierce it shatters the rocks. But God is not in the wind. An earthquake shakes the ground beneath his feet, but God is not in the quake. A fire blazes, but God is not in the fire. And then, in the stillness that follows, comes a sound so subtle it is almost nothing, a gentle whisper. And in that whisper, Elijah encounters the Almighty. Sometimes silence is not the withholding of God's voice, but the turning down of every other noise so that his voice can be heard with perfect clarity. We grow impatient in such seasons. We want the comfort of an immediate word, the reassurance of visible change, the soothing balm of quick answers. We want the sky to split open in dramatic display, for the problem to resolve in a moment, for the ache in our hearts to be healed in a single breath. But there are lessons that cannot be rushed, growth that cannot happen in the shallow soil of instant gratification. Just as a seed must be buried in darkness before it can break open and push toward the light, so too must our souls often dwell in the quiet depths before they can rise into new strength. Silence to the untrained ear may feel like stagnation, but in the spiritual realm, it is a place of hidden activity. Roots are digging deeper, the soul is being anchored, the brittle branches of false security are being pruned away. The absence of sound does not mean the absence of work. In truth, some of the most profound transformations of the soul take place in absolute stillness. And yet, when you find yourself in such a season, praying with no reply, knocking on doors that remain firmly shut, pleading for a sign that never comes, it is easy to believe that silence is punishment. You might imagine God sitting at a distance, withholding what you need until you prove yourself worthy. But what if silence, instead of being a verdict against you, is actually a gift for you? There is a silence that is born of mercy, the silence of a father who knows his child must walk a few steps alone, not because the father has abandoned them, but because he is teaching them how to stand. Sometimes silence is God's way of saying, I trust you to keep walking, even without the feelings you once relied on. In this way, silence is not the end of the conversation, but a new depth of it, a shift from speaking to being, from listening for answers to learning to rest in presence. This is the paradox that the impatient heart struggles to accept, that God's silence is never the final chapter. It is not a slammed door or a deserted house. It is a pause in the song, a breath drawn before the next phrase begins. It is the dark soil before the bloom, the winter before the thaw. One day when the answer comes, whether in the form you expect or in one you never could have imagined, you will see that the silence was not empty. It was preparation. It was the careful rearranging of circumstances, the shaping of your heart, the weaving of threads you did not know would one day converge into beauty. And you will understand that had the answer come sooner, you would have been unready to receive it, unable to steward it, blind to its true worth. Do not, in your hunger for quick resolution, run from the silence. Do not fill it with the counterfeit comforts of distraction and noise, thinking you can avoid the discomfort of waiting. Sit in it. Let it stretch you. Let it teach you. Because the truth is this: a life that has never learned to live in silence will never truly hear the sacred voice that calls it onward. And when you learn to stay in that place without panic, without grasping for the nearest escape, you will find that the silence itself begins to change you. The edges of your fear soften, the restlessness within you eases, and slowly, quietly, you begin to hear not with your ears but with your spirit, and you discover He has been speaking all along. We often think of miracles as something that happens after the storm has passed, after the seas have calmed, after the danger has lifted, after the pain has eased. We imagine God arriving at the end of the trouble to reward us for enduring it. But if you have ever walked through a real storm, one of grief so deep it takes your breath, of loss so devastating it cleaves your heart in two, of chaos so consuming you cannot find your bearings, you know that sometimes the miracle does not wait for the storm to end. Sometimes the miracle meets you in the middle of the tempest. It is there in the very eye of the storm, when every external circumstance is still in upheaval, that you feel an inexplicable steadiness within, a calm that is not natural, a strength that does not belong to you. You begin to sense that you are being held above the waves by a hand you cannot see. You realize that the miracle is not that the wind has stopped, but that you have stopped being afraid of it. Scripture is full of such moments. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not rescued from the fiery furnace before entering it. They were joined by a fourth figure within the flames, and the fire lost its power over them. Joseph was not freed from prison before God began to work. God was with him there, giving him favor and wisdom in the very place meant to confine him. The disciples, terrified on the storm-tossed sea, did not see Jesus appear after the wind died down. They saw him walking on the water toward them in the very midst of the storm. In each of these stories, the miracle was not the removal of the danger, but the presence of God within it. And that truth is as steady today as it was then. The God who walked into the furnace, into the prison, into the raging sea is the same God who will walk into your storm. If today you find yourself surrounded by more trouble than you think you can bear, if the reports are bad, the relationships are breaking, the dreams are collapsing, and the questions have multiplied beyond your ability to answer, resist the instinct to conclude that God has withdrawn. Do not believe the lie that He only comes when you are strong enough, worthy enough, or ready enough. His love is not constrained by chaos. His presence is not driven away by the flames or the flood. In fact, it is often in these very conditions that His love shines brightest. Sometimes the miracle is not that He delivers you from the storm, but that He teaches you to walk upon the waves with Him. And when you begin to see that the greatest change is not always in your circumstances, but in your soul, you will understand that the storm was never wasted. You will leave it different. Not necessarily softer in every place, but deeper where it matters most, tender in the spaces that were once hard, resilient where you once feared you might break. And perhaps most important of all, you will no longer need outward signs to believe that God is moving. You will have met Him for yourself in the crucible of your own trial. You will have felt the invisible strength that carried you when you could not carry yourself. And you will carry that knowing, not as theory, not as borrowed faith, but as the unshakable testimony of your own life. There are moments in the human journey when prayer ceases to be a carefully constructed sequence of words and becomes nothing more than a raw cry, a sound pulled from somewhere so deep it bypasses eloquence entirely. In these moments, you find yourself unable to begin with polished praise or end with tidy surrender. Your heart is too fractured for formalities, your breath too shallow for long petitions. Instead, your prayer is a broken whisper, a trembling admission that without divine intervention, you cannot take another step. This is not the kind of prayer that fills books or makes for poetic recitation. It is messy, unfinished, and unguarded. But paradoxically, it is this kind of prayer that shakes the heavens, not because it is artfully composed, but because it is utterly sincere. God has never been drawn to performance. He listens for the truth of the heart. When your prayer is stripped of all pretense, when it contains no bargaining, no hidden agenda, no attempt to impress, it becomes a direct offering of the soul, and he receives it with tenderness. Too often we have been taught to approach prayer as though God were a distant dignitary, waiting for perfect phrasing and the right order of words. We believe we must approach him at our best, clean and certain, offering up gratitude before daring to confess our need. Yet the God who knit you together in the womb does not require ceremonial entrance to hear your cry. He is not impressed by your ability to hold yourself together. In fact, what moves him most deeply is when you can no longer pretend, when you show up as you are, unmasked and unfiltered, bringing your doubt, exhaustion, and even your anger into his presence. It is in that very place at the end of your own resources that grace begins to flow like water into parched ground. Grace is not an abstract concept reserved for theology. It is the living, breathing power of God to sustain you when you have no strength left of your own. We often imagine grace arriving like a sudden rescue, a dramatic turn in our circumstances. But grace is far more constant, far more subtle, far more enduring. Sometimes grace does not change what is around you at all. It changes you within what remains. It steadies you when the ground is still shaking. It gives you the courage to take the next step when the path ahead is still obscured. It whispers to you in the dark, not promising an immediate way out, but reminding you that you are not alone in the night. And when you begin to realize that your survival is not the result of your own willpower, but of someone carrying you, you start to see grace for what it truly is, the steady presence of God in every breath you take. This is why the Apostle Paul could say, after pleading with God to remove the thorn in his flesh, that he would boast in his weakness. At first, Paul had begged for deliverance, for the pain to be removed so he could serve more effectively. But the answer he received was not relief, it was a revelation. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That single sentence reframed his entire life. Instead of viewing weakness as a hindrance, he began to see it as holy ground, the very place where God's power could most fully rest upon him. For when you have nothing left to prove and nothing left to hold on to, you finally give God space to be all that you need. In the strange economy of the kingdom, weakness is not a liability, but an invitation, an open doorway through which divine strength enters and transforms. We resist this truth because we live in a culture that rewards control, competence, and constant output. From an early age, we are told to be strong, to hide our tears, to keep moving no matter how much it hurts. We measure our worth by how well we can hold ourselves together under pressure. And so, when we reach the inevitable point where our strength fails, we feel ashamed, as though we have somehow fallen short. But God is not looking for the self-sufficient. He is looking for the surrendered. The moments when you collapse in his presence, admitting, "I can't do this without you," are not failures. They are the purest expressions of trust. They are the moments when the weight shifts from your shoulders to his, when the illusion of self-reliance gives way to the reality of divine dependence. From the outside, it may not look like anything has changed. The situation may remain just as it was, the obstacles as immovable as ever. But inside, something irrevocable has shifted. You begin to carry yourself differently, not with the brittle pride of someone who must do it all, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are being carried. And that inner transformation is the foundation for every outer change to come. This is the work of grace, to rebuild you from the inside out, to restore your soul before it restores your circumstances, to make you whole in the places no one else can see. There will be seasons when the darkness around you is thick, when every door remains closed, when the promises you once clung to seem distant and faint. In these times, it is not sheer willpower that will keep you standing, but the twin anchors of faith and hope. Faith is not a constant surge of optimism. It is the choice, made again and again, to believe that God is still who he says he is, even when nothing in your circumstances supports that belief. Hope is not a blazing torch that never wavers. It is the fragile ember that refuses to be extinguished, the quiet persistence that keeps you moving forward one small step at a time. Together, Faith and hope form a lifeline that holds you in place when the currents of life threaten to pull you under. Look at the stories of those who endured the longest nights. Joseph, betrayed and forgotten, held on to the dream God had given him long before he had any evidence it would come true. David, hunted and hiding in caves, composed psalms of worship in the very midst of his fear. Neither man had the luxury of immediate answers. What they had was a God who had not forgotten them, and a determination to cling to him regardless of how long it took. This is the quiet strength that is forged in the wilderness, the kind that does not depend on applause, comfort, or visible progress. It is the strength that grows in the soil of silence and sprouts in the shadow of uncertainty. And here is the mystery. The days you think are breaking you are often the days that are making you. The nights when you feel most abandoned are the very nights when unseen hands are shaping you for the calling ahead. You may not feel it, you may not see it, but every moment you choose to hold on, to pray when you feel nothing, to hope when you see nothing, to love when you have nothing left to give, you are becoming more than you were before. You are being prepared to carry something far greater than you could have borne in your own strength. And when at last the season shifts, when the light breaks through, and you step into the fulfillment of what you have been waiting for, you will not emerge as you were. You will be someone who has walked with God in the hidden places, someone who carries a depth that cannot be faked, and a testimony that cannot be stolen. One day you will stand on the other side of this valley and understand that the silence, the storm, the waiting, the weakness, none of it was wasted. Every unanswered prayer shaped your faith. Every delayed promise deepened your trust. Every moment of loneliness drew you closer to the only one who could truly fill the emptiness. And when you speak of it to others, you will not need to raise your voice or embellish the details. The authority in your story will not come from dramatic deliverance, but from the steady faithfulness that kept you through it all. You will be living proof that even in the fiercest storms, the deepest silences, and the longest nights, God is still enough. And perhaps this is the greatest miracle of all, not that you made it through untouched, but that you made it through transformed, that your heart, once fractured, beats now with a tenderness for others who walk the same dark paths, that your faith, once fragile, has become a lighthouse for those lost at sea, that your hope, once barely flickering, now burns steady enough to guide others home. The wilderness will have done its work. The silence will have yielded its wisdom. The storm will have revealed the one who never left your side. And you will know in the marrow of your soul that even when you had nothing left, you were never truly alone.